Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gretta Louw. So I gave my project with EACVA the title Artificial Organisms and Animate Machines. So who am I? I'm an Australian artist. I'm based in southern Germany, and I work with a lot of different media, but you could say that throughout my practice there's this kind of binding thread, or red thread as they would say in Germany, that it's about the intertwining of nature, culture and technology, or to put it another way, the technosphere and the biosphere. So that's the tensions between the biosphere, that's the living biological, organic, earthly systems, and the technosphere, which is that which humans call progress. And how do I work? My practice is inherently hybrid, so I'm often working back and forth between technological or algorithmic processes on the one hand and traditional craft methodologies on the other. And that's through that process that's taken me through textiles. I work a lot with embroidery, but also different forms of painting, oil painting with watercolors and so on. So I'm going to share a few images of how my work looks in exhibitions. This is from a solo show at Dam Projects a couple of years ago. In this exhibition, there were embroidered paintings. There were some smaller oil paintings based on algorithmically mediated nature photographs, and there were video works as well. This is an installation shot from an exhibition at Plus One Gallery in Antwerp, where again on the left it's an embroidered painting, and on the right there are smaller oil paintings. So in working across both old and new media, both fine art and craft methodologies, I've been interested in expanding the definition of technology. So I was really pleased to see what Patrick said earlier in his presentation about, ancient works of art also having this technological aspect to them. And I think that, artists have always tried to work with the latest technologies that were available to them. And I've really always been engaged in using digital, algorithmic and machinic technologies in ways that they're not really designed to be used. So this is a close-up of one of the embroidered paintings that I made, and in this I'm using a digital embroidery machine essentially as a pack of coloured pencils. So what I do is develop a large database or library of gestural drawings, and then I can select threads that have the appropriate colour, and I can layer those embroidered sort of marks over one another to essentially build up a colour surface or an image the same way that you would with a pack of coloured pencils. And so this is technology as well, also handmade items, things that we would consider to be very traditional or old-fashioned. These are also technologies. And I'm interested throughout the last sort of 10 years of my work in situating particularly craft technologies, especially those that have been coded female, like embroidery, within the context of technology. And this is a way of pointing to both the fact that contemporary technologies are not ahistorical, as the tech hype machine would often have us believe, and that in fact women have played a substantial role in the historical evolution of the digital revolution. Stitches were the first pixels, one could say. So why robots? I see this as a continuation of my long-standing engagement with new technologies in my work. AI and robotics, which you could say is the physical instantiation through which AI can act upon the physical world, are the new wave of the most influential technologies shaping contemporary life. And my approach is to always test these technologies outside of the confines for which they were developed in order to better understand their limitations and potential creative applications. And then since this is my work here on this wall, I wanted to address the question of why orchids. So this was something that I was really drawn to as I visited the botanical gardens in Singapore a couple of years ago, and since then it kind of became a bit of an obsession. Orchids are this kind of nexus of various forces coming together. So there's cultural forces, scientific forces, the biological interaction as these organic organisms have been coached, bred and shaped over time by interactions with humans. And this seemed to me like a really fertile motif to use in this exploration of robotic painting. Also, similarly, because, as we see through seeing orchids in pretty much every supermarket you'll walk into, there's also a huge impact of the kind of economic forces and historical forces that contribute to how these organisms are moving through the world, essentially. So what am I doing exactly during my EACVA residency? I proposed to explore a co-created techno-aesthetic in a series of oil paintings of orchids, asking questions like how the perception of beauty or what is natural might be changed through technological mediation. So at the stage of writing the application or the proposal, I still really had no idea as to how well robots could paint. So I didn't know whether I was going to be walking into a room with a kind of competitor or whether it was going to be something that I would need to coach substantially. And the idea that I had in the beginning was that basically I would take turns with the robot. So first it would paint a painting and then I would paint a version of that painting. And so if you look at the wall over here, I think it's better if I don't say which is which, but there are some paintings that are made by the robot and some that are made by me. Let's just say that. And the idea is that at the end of the project, there'll be two distinct series of oil paintings of orchids that progress from one to another, taking turns between the human and the robot. So the idea is that we each become sort of influenced by each other's painting, and that for those of you who were here this morning to hear Daniel and Michael's presentation, that really the sort of imperfections or the complications involved in the robotic painting process actually become a feature in the ongoing motif or the sort of development of the series. So a significant thing perhaps in terms of materials is that when I first started working with the eDavid robot, it was a shift to move into painting with oil paints rather than ink, which is what had predominantly been used before. And even just this really small change totally shifts how the robotic system has to be adapted. So the way that the brush moves over the canvas, the way that the robot attempts to pick up paint from the paint depository, all of these things become incredibly complex problems to be solved. And I mention that because I think that one thing that possibly isn't clear for a lot of people, who, even though we've had all these great conversations so far, is really how difficult this is and how complicated the process of painting really is. And I think that that's something that, if there was one thing that I would like everybody who attends this to take with them, it's a level of criticality when you're reading sentences like, "The robot painted the portrait." So ask yourself, what did the robot paint? How was the robot assisted? Which decisions were made by humans? How much interaction was there between the humans and the robots? Because when we hear this sentence or read it in the art press or the, big sort of press coverage out there that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, and we see things like the robot painted the portrait. My question is, did the robot robot go to the modulor and buy the canvas itself? Did it stretch the canvas? Did it prime the canvas? Did it choose the motif? At which stages was it being assisted, shaped, helped by humans? And that's before we even get into the rhizomatic nature of an AI and robotic-driven system, which, of course, when we say, I made a painting with a robot, well, of course I didn't really. I made a painting with a robot and the whole of the visual computing department at University of Constance and all of the programmers who contributed to the algorithms that that department uses and all of the people who generated content whose data was used to create those algorithms or to sort of train those algorithms. So I think when we sort of start to think about what these simple sentences really mean, like the robot painted the portrait, we realize that actually there was a discussion yesterday about the word automated and the fact that there is no such thing as automation. I thought that was really great, and I think that that's really relevant here too. It's this idea of whenever we're working with these systems, we are actually always working in these rhizomatic networks of other people, other creatives. So yeah, I just went off on a little tangent there, but we'll get back on track. So here we have an example of the first robotic painting on the left from an AI-generated image. And on the right, that's my version of the robot's painting. Between those two steps, I use an AI to perfect or beautify the motif, and then I try to replicate that as accurately and faithfully as possible. And then when we move on to the sort of expansion of the series, and I'm hoping that we'll have at least 6 and possibly 9 in each of these 2 series, we see how there's a progression from one to the next and how there's a kind of spontaneous generation of new floral features between these steps. This is probably a little bit what I was getting into before, which is the question of how hard could it possibly be? We have all of this technology, we have robots that do all these amazing things. How hard could it be for them to paint a painting? I mean, the short answer is it's very, very, very hard. It's really hard. Yeah. But also in that difficulty and in that complexity is the interest, that it is those contingencies that makes this an interesting artistic medium. And I think it comes back again to this question of what are the humans doing? What is their role in this process? Because, of course, when we look at images, Liat was talking yesterday about the large stack of tiles for the installation that they discarded. And that's an aesthetic decision and it's a subjective decision. So there are always these aspects where we're trying things out, we're making decisions about whether it turned out how we wanted it to or not. And if it didn't turn out how we wanted it to, is the mistake interesting or not? So I'm sort of, maybe I'll just tell a little brief story. The first 2 paintings that I did, one was created by the robot and one was painted by me. I sent a photo of these 2 canvases to some esteemed colleagues of mine and close friends and asked them, so what do you think when you look at these? I didn't tell them anything about, my intent or where I wanted to go with this. I just said one's painted by the robot and one's painted by me. First of all, it was interesting that a lot of people were not sure which one I painted and which one the robot painted, which I think is really interesting because it shows the lack of understanding in the general public about where robotic painting is. And I think there's a lot of media and communication issues that are responsible for that, because of what I was saying before about how we talk about the robot painting something. The next thing, when I sort of had said, well, the one on the left is by the robot and the one on the right is by me, A friend of mine who's a painter said, "It looks like you're trying to prove that you can paint better than a robot." Which really, honestly, was not my intent. But what I see as the project develops and as the number of canvases develops is that there are all these different stories that can be told and hopefully will be told through this very simple, quite minimalist approach to a raw canvas, an oil painting on the canvas. Some are painted by robots, some are painted by me. And I think when we imagine 6 or 9 of them together, there are different possibilities, so one might be, some sort of optimistic ideas about co-creation between robots and people, where that might go, what sort of worlds that opens up. Some might be quite dystopian, where it seems like, we'll be replaced by robots. I know that there's a lot of stuff out there on social media and so on about this fear of creativity dying out because robots and AI will be able to do all of that. But I think equally we could say that, what we're seeing is how far there still is to go before there is any chance of, most jobs being replaced by robots and AI. But in any event, I'm really curious to see where that goes and to see which stories or narratives will be kind of readable in these collections at the end, and also which will not be visible, which will not be present. So, for example, a lot of the kind of hype that we're hearing at the moment about robots and AI, which, personally for me, having had this experience so far of working closely with robots, I feel like I have a finely tuned skepticism about the media that I read now. So that is an overview of where I'm up to at the moment. Obviously, we're about halfway through the project, so we hope that you will tune in half a year or so to see where we got to. Thank you.
Time for questions. Anyone?
Okay.
What's the odds get going? So you said 6 or 9. What's the type of constraints you think may?
In terms of how many?
6 versus 9 or more?
Time. Yeah.
Is it time with the team of Constance, or is it other difficulties? Or do you want to, basically my question is more, if we look at the series here, are you imagining a certain goal? You have an idea of what you would like these 6 or 9 of each series to be? Mm-hmm. Is that why you're not sure?
So I would like it to be 9, but it will be dependent on time. And what we see here, these 4 paintings, there's actually 3 from one series. So the 3 on the left are one series and the one on the right is from the second series. So they're both paintings of orchids, but there's two series. And yeah, I was thinking about how to present them. I want them to be sort of so that the viewer can see them all at once rather than in a long line and you have to sort of progress along, because I want people to be able to kind of do that cross-referencing between the different images, to be sort of reading different influences between the canvases. And I think 9 would be a nice square. They're a square format, and I like the fact that then you won't have in a row basically all of the robotic paintings and all of my paintings, but they'll be sort of interposed between one another. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm coming back to the question of the aesthetics. You said that you cannot hear the sentence anymore. It was drawn by a robot or painted by a robot. And understanding now the complex process, I completely can relate to that. But in your opinion, you said something about people would have to have more of a concept of how this process is realized. So what should we do to make the artistic aspect of this more visible to the public? To understand that this is not something like an ANN generating a kitschy kind of cat image, but it's something completely different. What kind of do we need to have more education on that part, or how do we bring out the artistic qualities of that?
So I'm not sure, I might have heard two questions there. The first question about how do we maybe reach people more so they understand better and that they can decipher the media better. That's something that I've been talking to Professor Doyson about, how we can express what's actually happening in the lab. Also as a way, I think, to counter some of the claims that are being made from other projects that are possibly a little bit cynical, in that they leave a lot out. And then I think, there is also a responsibility in the media too, both from really all sides. And I think part of that is about, being diligent in reporting what's actually happening. But part of it also is because at the moment there is this really successful narrative coming out of Silicon Valley about the supremacy of a lot of these contemporary technologies like AI. And I think it's not just about robotics, it's not just about robotic painting, or perhaps we should rather call it robotic assisted painting. But it's about, interests in technology more generally, and we have to it's about media literacy. We have to ask ourselves, who is telling this narrative and who is benefiting from this narrative, and that's really been something that I've tried to approach throughout my practice, is really looking at what stories are being told and by whom and for what purpose, and trying to get to the bottom of some of that and to understand what is it about really. So I've done a lot of work with AI. I did a project together with my 5-year-old son at the time, and AI, and I trained the AI on his drawings, and then asked it to make drawings of children or portraits of children. And they were, as you can imagine, scary, scary looking. And I think, so it's something that I've always been interested in doing, is kind of taking these technologies outside of what they're meant to do. And I think that's something that's really special about this project, is that we're working with robots that were designed for other purposes. Like the robot that I'm painting with Michael and the team in Constance is designed to weld cars, essentially. It's designed to be on a conveyor belt kind of process. So in doing something so creative and unusual with that machine, we're really sort of stress testing it, essentially, and we're seeing what it can actually do and what it can't do. And in the process of that, of course, there's a lot of stuff that we can learn about what we do too. What is painting actually? What do I do when I hold the brush? There's so many things that I do as a painter that I never thought about until I watched this robot struggle for 15 minutes to try to fill a spot like this, and it just could not do it. And I could have done it in 10 seconds. It's a really interesting process.
Thank you very much. This is, I couldn't agree more, because basically what I hear throughout the whole conference is we're contesting this narrative of the supremacy, as you say, of AI. Because if we look at AI as a means to an end, it has a definite goal to help us to make it smoother, to make it more easy. And it is easy to generate these kitschy images or have an abstract written by an AI and so on. But what really is going on here is that we see the flaws, we reflect ourselves, our doing. As a writer, I see that too when I work with an AI, and get a better understanding of this interaction. And this is something in philosophy and in post-phenomenology, they say technology is always multi-stable, which means that it can always be used in a very different way, also in a subversive way.
Yeah.
This makes me optimistic, so thank you very much.
Thank you.